let's give you all the opportunity to ask questions. Joan, and then we'll come in the front.
You were at a breakfast earlier this morning.
I was.
I believe with KLBJ-AM, was that it?
I was.
How did that forum compare to this? And would you just since I was not able to be there or was not there, the mood and the questioning and the sense you had of that group?
Well, since you're the first person to ask a question from this group, I don't know. We'll have to see what the other questions.
Tell about the Tea Party.
There was, there was a telling moment in this. Evan asked at the get-go of this how many people in that room identified themselves as being Tea Party members or supporters or whatever the term would be. And what would you say the percentage?
Easily half the room went up.
Easily half.
Easily half.
Yeah. So
I told PJ, I said,
let's do the same thing here.
PBS studio, a little different.
Let's do the same thing here.
How many people in the room here? Yeah, consider yourselves members of the Tea Party.
None. So there's the answer to your question.
But yeah, you know, we noted in the conversation that there had been a national poll, which PJ and I both disbelieved, that had said that 12% of the country self-identified as part of the Tea Party. The Tribune and the university had done a poll that found that 31% of Texans, by comparison, self-identified as Tea Party. That, too, may be low, in fact. Based on this room.
You know, it's so much the way you ask the question. I am so off, so distrustful now of polling data. And so one thing is you don't have to, I mean, I've been a reporter I've been a writer of one kind or another for 40 years. I've been a reporter for 30 years. You don't have to spend, you can spend about a week being a reporter to know that the answer to the question is all in the question.
How you ask the question.
How you ask the question. So that's one part of polling baloney. And the other part is that how do they get a hold of anybody anymore? I mean, if you do a traditional phone poll, you don't get anybody younger than me. You know, I mean, you get all these like 60 and over, people, because they're the last people left with phones.
Got to do cell phones. You got
to do cell phones
Internet,
and computers.
right.
And everybody's got caller ID. Now, who calls back a polling service? They can call them. And in fact, who talks to them anyway?
When they call the first time, that's right.
They always call us right now because we live in New Hampshire, and so we get a lot of polling, especially during a presidential year. All through 2008, the damn phone would ring every time, right in the middle of dinner, and I just pick it up and hang it up. I'm not talking to anybody about none of their business.
All right.
Yeah.
Dan, this gentleman here, and then in the back.
Any thoughts on the next Congress and the 2012 run?
I think just per what I said about polling data, that it's magic 8 ball, answer cloudy, ask again later. But I do think we're going to see a major shift in power in the forthcoming Congress because people are dissatisfied with the sitting Congress. What that shift in power is going to mean is going to depend on two things. One thing is the size of the win. The likelihood of the Republicans having a veto-proof dominance in both houses is slim to none.
In fact, I think those polls you hate, none of them even show anything like that.
No one's predicting that. And so therefore, and then even if they did, the idea of governing from Congress is something that is essentially, the last time we did that was in the run-up to the Civil War, and so the outcome of that was beautiful. And we all had a lot of fun during that period in 1860 to 64. But so much of this is going to depend upon President Obama's skill as not as a candidate, but as a politician in power. Can he accommodate himself to the change in Congress the way Bill Clinton was able to accommodate himself? And Bill, he both changed his positions and he also fought back at the same time. He was very good at puncturing Newt Gingrich's ego and of thwarting the Republicans in things like attempting to shut down the government. At the same time, he shifted his position to more conservative Obama strikes me as being a person neither nimble enough to do the first nor and too stubborn to do the second. And so I think that he may find himself facing a very difficult 2 years. And I don't think he's going to be in the position that Bill Clinton was in to be reelected. Or I wouldn't think that, except for the amazing ability of the Republican Party to come up with the worst possible candidate at the worst possible moment.
You leave open the possibility that that's what will happen this time. So
heck yes.
If 2010 is 94, 2012 may be 96. No disrespect to Senator Dole, but that you may see
absolutely.
You may see a candidate of that low enthusiasm generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In 12. Okay, sir, and then back there. Sir? You?
What do you think of the enormous amount of governmental resources, federal, state, and local, that our society applies to the so-called war on drugs?
We lost the war on drugs. We lost the war on drugs. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And of course, the fact that the government and authorities in general, in fact, probably adults in general, have been unwilling. We now have in our society 40-some years of experience with extensive drug use. I mean, before the middle 60s, drug use was rare. It was limited to certain subcultures within the United States. It wasn't something that really obtruded itself on ordinary middle-class life. We didn't know much about drugs 45 years ago. We've had 45 years of drug education. I don't mean that in a just say no sense, People have been saying yes all over the place. And by now you would think that we would realize that there's a huge range of difference among drugs and the kind of social damage that they do. They all do some measure of social damage. There's no doubt about that. But every society that we know of in the history of the world has had some or another method of smoking something, drinking something, or sitting in sweat lodges until they got nutty, some method of getting outside oneself. It's common to the human experience. And every society has certain taboos and restrictions upon this, And as societies change, we have to change these things. So marijuana is not without its social cost, but, fundamentally it's a drug that makes teenage boys drive slow. It's got its upside,
too. So it weighs on the other side of the ledge. That's kind of like...
Well, we see other drugs, like methamphetamines, are obviously exceedingly destructive. The opiates are not so much destructive in the behavior that they cause, but because of the addiction and because of the fact that the ever larger doses are needed, they have enormous social cost. The kind of party hallucinogens that are running around, ecstasy and LSD and so on, are not things that most people use very often or for very long. They're probably, not. So we have taken all these resources to fight drug wars, and there are some drugs that are worth fighting out there, and some people selling those drugs who are worth fighting, but we have, failed to concentrate our resources, failed to pick our enemy, failed to pick our battles on this, and we're seeing the results down in Mexico of that failure.
Betsy.
Kind of an observation, although I think you just kind of changed your tone so that you've answered my question, but you were talking about the government as if it were an external entity that is imposed on us. Would it be a healthy step for all Americans to recognize that the government is us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in a democracy, I said this in the first book I wrote about politics, Parliament of Horrors. I said, the problem with Parliament of Horrors, the horrors are us, I mean, this is a democracy. We create our own government. It is, however, important to remember, and I think this is a moment to remember is that when you create an institution, no matter how much control or input you have over this institution, and all of you who've been involved in nonprofits and schools and things like this will recognize this phenomenon. Once you create, churches are another good example, once you create an institution, that institution starts to have aims and ends of its own, independent from its creators. There's even a whole study of this in business school. You know, this is the conundrum of managers. You know, this is the manager problems. You know, the owners, shareholders in the corporation are theoretically in charge of management, but management runs the corporation on a day-to-day basis, and the managers may be running the corporation for the benefit of management rather than the benefit of the owners of the corporation. And we have a very similar situation with government. And I think the 1994 Republican takeover of Congress is a very good example. We sent a bunch of people to Washington to clean up what we perceived to be a mess, and they immediately drank the Kool-Aid and became part of the problem. You know, in fact, they arguably made the problem worse. So we have to keep an eye on the institutional. You know, we have to be keeping. Yes, we're ultimately in charge, but we create these very powerful institutions, and then they tend to sort of be captured by the people who are in charge of them and run for the benefit of the people who are in charge of them rather than the people who own them.
Lynn, how are we on time?
It is 11 right now.
Okay, let's do two more, and then we're going to maybe let PJ go, and we'll let you all go as well. Let me do the gentleman in the back, and I have taken no questions from the side, so I'm going to take one last over there. Apologies, line side. Sir.
I'm intrigued about your use of the word politics rather than government, and I'm trying to figure out, do you equate the two, or are they separate? Or?
Well, you know, government is the institution, and politics is the means by which we determine what sort of institution we will have and what sort of people will be put in the institution.
Joke waiting to be made.
Yeah, joke waiting to be made. Yeah.
I assume you want your 6-year-old to breathe clean air and drink clean water. Do we trust Alcoa and Dow Chemical to police themselves and invoke the necessary emission requirements? I mean, isn't this long arm of the federal government coming in and intruding? But look what we end up with.
There is no doubt that one of the great problems that we have with government, I mean, one of the great problems governments face and that we face dealing with government is protection of free goods, of what's called the tragedy of the commons. When something has no ownership, particularly such as the air or the oceans, when something is common property, there is a tendency to abuse this common property by people looking to make a profit. It's a matter of like, and should we do something about this? Yes. I mean, we have been doing something about it. Those of us, you know, who remember back to the 60s and 50s, those of us especially who grew up in coal town like I did, I mean, a coal burning town like I did, a town with steel mills and refineries and so on. Remember when the air was a lot worse than it is now, and remember when things like the Cuyahoga River caught fire in Cleveland, you know, and you can, you know, I don't think I want to go swimming in the Cuyahoga River yet, but I don't think you can light it anymore, you know. Yes, I mean, there's definitely a role for government in this, you know, but, you know, we have to look for the most efficient and efficacious role for the federal government. For instance, if you want cars to produce less pollution, how do you go about getting them to produce less pollution? Do you go about putting a market value on a kind of cap and trade, as it were, on the pollution, saying, well, you know, you do what you want with your car, but the more junk you pump out in the air, the more we're going to tax you? That's one approach. Or do you have some government bureaucrat decide the method by which pollution is reduced? That's how we got the catalytic converters, which are now littering up our landfills with poisonous heavy metals, and which used to set the leaf piles on fire every time you drove the car over the top of them. And if you got under the car, catalytic converter was about 350 degrees, and so if you touched that, you were real unhappy. There are a lot of different ways to go about protecting the oceans and the air and the water, and indeed the climate itself. And there's no magic bullet to this, but we have to keep an eye on things like the Environmental Protection Agency, lest the Environmental Protection Agency be run for the benefit of bureaucrats in the Environmental Protection Agency without any attention to, and we also have to keep our eye on cost benefit. I mean, we do have to be realistic about this. What is more important in the world? Whether people starve or whether we have more whales. Now, I love whales. No one loves a whale more than I love a whale, But I don't want people to starve to save that. I happen to value people somewhat more than I value whales. Not necessarily an exact trade-off, but a lot of the pollution that we face, a lot of the things that are dangerous in climate change are also a result of the fact that there are 1.3 billion people in China who just a few years ago were starving and who are now on the verge of living a materially decent life. Are they mucking up the air to do this? I've been to China, spent quite a bit of time in China, and yes, they certainly are, And of course, our ability to control what the Chinese do is extremely limited. But we do have to face the cost benefit of what we do, and we can't just pick out a villain like Alcoa and say, oh, well, it's just villainous corporations that do this. No, it's our own desire for a better standard of living. We want it all. I mean, we want clean lakes and rivers and seas and oceans, and we want a steady climate without any surprises, and at the same time, we want a better life for ourselves and for our materially better life for ourselves and our children. And if we're wise, we want a materially better life for people around the world. I don't mean just out of Christian charity. I mean that I would rather have 1.3 billion fat, happy Chinese than 1.3 billion armed, angry Chinese. So.
That's a good place to leave it, huh?
I think so.
Right, a very upbeat thought. Well, on that high note, let us conclude the first taping and thank our great guest. Terrific to have him back in Austin. P.J. O'Rourke, please.
Thank you.
Come out to the Texas Book Festival, support it, come see PJ, and we'll see you maybe at one of the other tapings we're doing this weekend. So thanks very much.